The Return of Wicker Hollow. In the heart of Maine lies Wicker Hollow, a small town long abandoned and shrouded in mystery. The air is thick with the scent of decay, and the buildings, once vibrant with life, now stand as hollow shells, mere whispers of a forgotten past. The only living souls are a handful of survivors who return once a year, compelled by a tradition that none dare break. This year, the group was smaller than ever. Emily, a history professor, had been coming to Wicker Hollow for 5 years. She believed the town's dark history was worth preserving. Tom, a former soldier, joined for reasons he kept to himself. Lucas, an amateur filmmaker, hoped to capture something that would make his career. And Jane, Emily's former student, was dragged along by her insatiable curiosity and a desire to impress her mentor. As the group arrived, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows. The sky, streaked with blood-red hues, seemed to warn of the horrors to come. They set up camp in the town square, the heart of Wicker Hollow, where the annual ritual was to take place. The tradition was simple: light a bonfire and stay the night. Those who stayed would be rewarded with the truth of the town's curse. Emily gathered the group around the fire, her face illuminated by its flickering glow. Wicker Hollow was once a bustling town, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. But in 1887, a mysterious illness swept through, turning the townspeople into something else. Zombies, Lucas interjected, eager to make his mark on the conversation. Not zombies, Emily corrected. Not exactly. The disease reanimated the dead, but these creatures were driven by a hunger not for flesh, but for the very essence of life itself. Tom's eyes narrowed. You're saying they're still here? Emily nodded. They walk the streets every night, trapped between life and death. The bonfire is meant to keep them at bay, but it's only a temporary measure. As if on cue, a cold wind swept through the square, causing the fire to dance and sputter. The air grew thick with an unnatural chill, and the survivors huddled closer together. Jane, her face pale, asked, "What happens if the fire goes out?" Emily's gaze turned solemn. "Then we become part of the town's curse. The dead will rise and claim us as their own." The group sat in silence, the weight of Emily's words hanging heavy in the air. The night wore on, and despite the fire's warmth, an icy fear settled into their bones. The town seemed to come alive, with the wind whispering secrets through the cracks in the walls and the shadows shifting with a life of their own. Just after midnight, the wind grew stronger, howling through the deserted streets. The fire flickered violently and a chill ran down Emily's spine. "We need more wood," she said, her voice trembling. "It's the only thing keeping them away." Tom stood, his jaw set. "I'll get it. I'll go with you," Jane offered, her voice shaking but resolute. They ventured into the darkness, their flashlights barely piercing the inky blackness. The town seemed to close in around them, the silence oppressive and suffocating. They reached an old, dilapidated house, its windows shattered and doors hanging askew. "Quick," Tom urged, grabbing a few broken boards and tossing them to Jane. As they turned to leave, a sound behind them made them freeze. A low, guttural moan, followed by the shuffling of feet. Tom's flashlight beam swept across the room, landing on a figure standing in the doorway. Its eyes were vacant, skin sallow and decayed, and it moved with a slow, deliberate gait. It wasn't alone. More figures emerged from the shadows, their hollow eyes fixed on the intruders. "Run!" Tom shouted, grabbing Jane's hand and pulling her towards the door. They sprinted back to the square, hearts pounding, with the undead in close pursuit. The fire was almost out, its light dimming with every passing second. Lucas and Emily frantically threw wood onto the flames, but it was too late. The first of the creatures reached the edge of the square, its lifeless eyes reflecting the dying fire. "Get back!" Tom yelled, brandishing a flaming stick. But the creatures pressed on, undeterred by the weak light. Emily grabbed a handful of salt from her bag, a relic from her research, and threw it at the approaching horde. The creatures recoiled, hissing and retreating from the barrier. "It's working!" she cried, her voice tinged with relief. Salt keeps them away! The group scrambled to create a circle of salt around the fire, but their supply was limited. As the last grains fell, a creature lunged, breaking through the barrier and dragging Lucas into the darkness. His screams echoed through the square, sending a wave of terror through the survivors. "We have to go," Tom urged, his voice shaking. "We can't stay here." Emily nodded, her face pale. "To the church," she said, pointing to a building on the edge of town. "It's the only place left with any real protection." They ran through the streets, the undead hot on their heels. The church loomed ahead, its doors ajar as if beckoning them to safety. They burst through the doors and slammed them shut, barricading them with pews and whatever else they could find. The church was dark and cold, its air heavy with centuries of prayer and despair. They huddled together, listening to the sounds of the undead clawing at the doors, their moans a constant reminder of the horror waiting outside. "We're safe here," Emily said, trying to reassure the others. "The church was consecrated ground. They can't enter." Tom's eyes scanned the darkened room, his mind racing. "For how long?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Emily's gaze met his, and the truth was clear. They were trapped, surrounded by the dead, with no hope of escape. The night stretched on, the moans outside growing louder and more desperate. As dawn approached, the sounds began to fade, replaced by an eerie silence. The survivors knew they couldn't stay. The curse of Wicker Hollow was relentless, and it would claim them if they remained. With the first light of day, they ventured out, moving quickly and silently through the empty streets. The undead had retreated, leaving only their decayed footprints in the dust. The town was a tomb, a place where the dead ruled, and the living were merely intruders. As they left Wicker Hollow behind, Emily turned for one last look. The town stood silent and still, a monument to a darkness that could never be truly vanquished. She knew they would never return. The truth of Wicker Hollow's curse was now etched in their souls, a nightmare that would haunt them forever. The survivors never spoke of that night again, but they carried the memory with them, a constant reminder of the horrors that lurk in the shadows of forgotten places. And as Wicker Hollow faded into the distance, the wind whispered its secrets, a mournful lament for the lives lost to its curse. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe.